She didn't mean for him to hear it. The curse slipped off her tongue the way it always did when something infuriated her, fast, sharp, Sicilian, and filthy. A whisper she'd learned from her grandmother and never once used in polite company. But the room went dead silent. And then slowly the man at the doorway turned around. He was smiling. Not the smile of someone who was offended. The smile of someone who had just found exactly what he was looking for. "Say that again," he said quietly. "But this time, look at me when you say it." If this story has you gripped already, subscribe right now, drop the name of your city in the comments, and let me see just how far this story's going to travel. Now let's get into it. Emerson Moretti had a rule about mansions. She didn't trust them. Not the high ceilings, not the oil portraits that watched you from the walls, not the kind of quiet that settled over a room like it was hiding something. 22 years of appraising antiques had taken her into some of the most beautiful homes in the world, and she had learned painfully sometimes that the prettier the house, the dirtier the history. But this job paid well, obscenely well. That was the second thing she had a rule about. She didn't ask questions when the money was obscenely good. She was already regretting both rules. The desk sat in the center of a study on the third floor of a Manhattan townhouse, so old and so immaculately kept that it made the Metropolitan Museum feel modern. And the desk itself, the desk itself was breathtaking. Florentine, mid-17th century, walnut and rosewood inlay, the kind of joinery that took a craftsman a lifetime to learn and another lifetime to perfect. The legs were carved with laurel branches and what looked like a family crest she hadn't been able to identify yet. The surface was worn in exactly the right places, the way old things were worn when they had been used, not displayed, not preserved behind glass, but lived with. Emerson had a weakness for things that had been lived with. She set her case down on the floor beside it, pulled on her white cotton gloves, and got to work. She'd been at it for about 40 minutes, measuring, photographing, cross-referencing the inlay pattern against her database when she found the first problem. The back left corner of the bottom drawer didn't sit flush. Not by much, maybe 2 millimeters. But 2 millimeters on a piece this old and this finely made wasn't an accident. It was either damage unlikely given the otherwise pristine condition, or it was intentional. She crouched down, pulled the drawer fully out, and pressed her fingers against the interior base. Solid. No hollow sound. She pressed the left side panel. Nothing. She pressed the right. Nothing. Son of a... She bit the rest of it back and tried the underside of the drawer frame. Her knuckle grazed something, a tiny brass pin, barely thicker than a needle, set flush into the wood. She hadn't seen it because she hadn't been looking for it. You never look for something you didn't know was there. Maleditu, she muttered under her breath. The Sicilian slipped out the way it always did, involuntary like a reflex. Her grandmother's word for something that was cursed, maddening, impossible. You miserable, God-forsaken thing. She pressed the pin. Nothing happened. Figlio di puttana. The words came out soft and vicious and thoroughly Sicilian, the kind of phrase that would have gotten her mouth washed out with soap in her grandmother's kitchen. She didn't even realize she'd said it out loud until the room answered her. Not with silence, with the sound of a door opening. And then a voice, low, unhurried, amused. Say that again. Emerson's hands went still. But this time, the voice continued and she could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the floor behind her. Look at me when you say it. She stood up, she turned around, and she understood immediately and completely that she had made a very serious mistake. The man was not what she had expected. She hadn't expected anything, technically. She'd been told the owner of the property would not be present during the appraisal, which was standard for jobs at this level. The owners sent their lawyers or their assistants, or they sent no one at all, and left her a key code and a contact number for emergencies. No one had mentioned him. He was tall, not extraordinarily so, but tall enough that the room seemed to reorganize itself around him. Dark suit, no tie. The kind of face that could have belonged to a Renaissance painting, all sharp angles and dark eyes, and the particular stillness of someone who had never once in their life needed to raise their voice to command a room. His hair was black, shot through with silver at the temples, and he wore it like he wore everything else, like he didn't think about it, which meant he thought about it constantly. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something that has just surprised him. Not offended, not angry, interested. That was worse. I'm sorry, Emerson said, and she hated herself immediately for the apology. I didn't realize anyone was... You didn't answer my question, he said. She blinked. Excuse me? I asked you to say it again. He tilted his head slightly. The phrase, what you said. I said I was sorry, but before that. Emerson stared at him. I don't think that's necessary, she said carefully. No, he agreed. It's not necessary. I'm asking anyway. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight, and Emerson did what she always did when she was afraid she got precise. I said, figu di butana, she said flat and clear. It's Sicilian. It means the desk is giving me a problem. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, not because it was cold, but because his eyes were already doing something else entirely, cataloging her, she realized. The way she cataloged antiques. Methodically. Completely. I know what it means, he said. My grandmother said it to me every morning until I was 14. Emerson hadn't expected that. She didn't show it. Then you understand it was nothing personal. I understand it was extremely personal, he said. You called my desk a son of a whore. Technically, I called the drawer mechanism. My name is Niccolo D'Amato. He said it the way people said things they expected to land, like dropping a stone into still water and watching to see how wide the ripples went. Emerson kept her face still, but her stomach dropped 3 floors. She knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name, even people who pretended they didn't even. People who went out of their way to live the kind of life where a name like that should never come up. It came up anyway. It always did. Niccolo D'Amato was the kind of man whose name was said quietly and quickly and usually followed by a subject change. I see, she said. I see that I was not informed you would be present. No, he agreed. You weren't. He walked slowly without any apparent urgency to the other side of the desk, put his hands in his pockets and looked down at it the way she had been looking at it. Were you told why this piece is being auctioned? Estate liquidation, she said. That's what the contract says. He reached out and touched the edge of the desk with one finger, not the way someone touched something they owned, but the way someone touched something they were reclaiming. And did you find anything interesting? Emerson glanced down at the drawer she'd pulled out, still sitting on the floor beside her case. She looked back at him. It's a remarkable piece, she said carefully. Exceptional condition. The inlay work is consistent with mid-17th century Florentine workshop production, probably. That's not what I asked. She stopped. He looked up at her then, and for the first time she felt the full weight of what his eyes were doing. He wasn't just watching her, he was reading her. Every hesitation, every word she chose, every word she didn't. You found something in the drawer, he said. It wasn't a question. A pin mechanism, she said. It might be decorative. It's not decorative. Emerson went very still. Mr. D'Amato. There is a compartment, he said, built into the base structure of that desk. My grandfather had it made. He was a very careful man. He looked back down at the wood. This desk was stolen from my family 31 years ago by the man who owned this house, Thomas Sterling. Perhaps you've heard of him. She had art world, old money, died 2 years ago with no direct heirs, which was why the estate was being liquidated. I'm sorry to hear that, she said. Are you Mr. D'Amato? I was hired to appraise this piece for auction. I wasn't hired to whatever it is you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, he said. I'm telling you. That compartment holds something that belongs to my family, and you are going to help me open it. The wire went tight again. No, Emerson said. The word came out clean and certain, and she was proud of it. Niccolo D'Amato looked at her. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had asked a door to open, and the door had very politely declined, and he was now considering his options. No, he repeated, tasting the word. I don't know what's in that compartment, she said. I don't know what you believe is in there, but I was hired by the Sterling Estate's legal representatives, and my obligation is to them, and I'm not going to but your license, he said. She stopped. What? Your appraiser's license, AAA certified, issued 2006, renewed every 3 years. He said it without looking at his phone, without looking at anything except her. You had a dispute in 2019. A client claimed you'd misattributed a piece and sold it below value. The complaint was dismissed, but it's still on your record. Her mouth had gone dry. That complaint was fabricated and dismissed. Complaints don't have to be true to be damaging, he said. A new one from a client of a certain standing, the kind of standing that makes auction houses nervous, would be very difficult to walk back, even if it was equally fabricated. These things have a way of accumulating. She stared at him. You would do that, she said. Not a question, a recognition. I would prefer not to, he said, and he sounded genuinely like he meant it. I would prefer that you understood what that desk means to my family and helped me with a simple mechanical problem. And then I would have my people wire the full appraisal fee to your account before you left the building, plus let's call it a consulting fee that would make your next 2 years extremely comfortable. And if I say no again? He looked at her for a long moment. Then I say no to things too, he said quietly, and the things I say no to tend to stay that way. Emerson's hands were shaking. Not visibly, she had trained herself out of visible shaking years ago in graduate school, standing in front of panels of experts who were looking for any crack in her composure. But internally, she was trembling in a way that had nothing to do with cold. She looked at the desk. She looked at the pin mechanism she'd found in the drawer frame. She looked at Niccolò D'Amato, who was watching her with an expression of perfect patient certainty, like a man who had already calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. Tell me about your grandfather, she said. Something shifted in his face, almost imperceptible, but she caught it, a flicker of something real behind the composure. Why, Brie? Because if I'm going to help you open a hidden compartment in a 17th century Florentine desk, she said, I need to understand the mechanism, and the mechanism was built for a reason by someone with a reason. So tell me about him. He studied her for a moment. Then he pulled a chair from the corner of the room, not the one behind the desk, she noticed, but one from the side, like he was declining the position of authority the desk offered, and sat down. His name was Enzo, Niccolò said. Enzo D'Amato. He came to America from Palermo in 1951 with $40 in a suitcase and a knife he never used on anyone who didn't deserve it. A pause. He built something here, something significant. And he was a man who believed that the most important things in a life, the proof of what you'd done, what you'd built, who had been loyal and who had not, should be kept somewhere that only someone worthy could find it. Worthy, Emerson repeated. Worthy, he confirmed. He was theatrical about it. He liked puzzles. He liked the idea that the right person would recognize the right mechanism. And Thomas Sterling wasn't the right person. Thomas Sterling, Niccolò said, and his voice didn't change at all, which was somehow more frightening than if it had, was a thief. He took the desk 31 years ago under circumstances that I am not going to describe to you tonight. What I will tell you is that whatever is in that compartment, he never opened it, because he didn't know how, and neither did anyone he hired. But you think I can? I think, he said, that you called my desk a son of a whore in my grandmother's dialect, without thinking twice, which means that somewhere in your history there is Sicily. And Sicily means you understand a certain kind of construction, the way our people build things to last, to hide, to protect. It's not just craftsmanship, it's philosophy. Emerson was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother was Sicilian, she said. My entire family is Sicilian, he said, for 6 generations. And mine, she said before she could stop herself. He looked at her. I know, he said. Something cold moved through her. What does that mean? It means, he said carefully, that I did not hire you by accident, Miss Moretti. I had you hired, specifically, by name. The room was very quiet. Why, she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the desk again, at the worn surface, the carved laurel branches, the crest she still hadn't identified. Because he said at last, your last name is Moretti, and the last person who could open that desk, the person my grandfather built it for, was also named Moretti. Emerson's heart stopped. Say that again, she said, and her voice, unlike her hands, was perfectly steady. He looked at her. Your grandmother's name, he said quietly. What was it? She didn't answer. What was your grandmother's name? Miss Moretti. And in the silence that followed, Emerson realized that the job she'd taken, the desk she'd been sent to, appraise the man sitting in that chair watching her, none of it was coincidence. None of it had ever been coincidence. And the pin mechanism in the drawer frame, the thing she'd found by accident, the thing no one else had found in 31 years, she'd found it in 40 minutes. Because some part of her, some part she hadn't known was listening, had known exactly where to look. Her name was Katerina, Emerson said. And the moment the words left her mouth, Niccolo D'Amato closed his eyes. Not in relief, not in triumph, in something that looked terrifyingly like grief. Then God help us both, he said softly. Because what's in that desk is going to change everything you think you know about your family. Emerson Moretti looked at the desk that had brought her here. She looked at the man who had arranged for her to come, and she picked up the drawer. She was going to open it. Not for him, not for the money. For the name her grandmother had whispered in the dark in Sicilian on the night before she died, a name she'd told Emerson to forget to never speak to Carrie like a stone and drop into the deepest water she could find. A name that was carved, she now realized, into the family crest on the leg of this desk. D'Amato. Emerson's fingers moved before her mind had fully agreed to let them. That was the thing about muscle memory, it didn't wait for permission. 22 years of handling locks and latches and mechanisms built by people who had been dead for centuries had wired her hands to think independently, and right now her hands were thinking very clearly even while the rest of her was somewhere between fury and freefall. She turned the drawer over in her grip, running her thumb along the interior base panel, pressing in specific intervals, not randomly, not by instinct, but by method. Hidden compartments and Florentine pieces from this period followed certain architectural logic. The craftsmen who built them were guild-trained, and guilds meant shared techniques, shared philosophies. If you knew the philosophy, you could read the object the way you read a sentence. Her grandmother had taught her that. Katerina Moretti, 81 years old, hands like paper, and eyes like obsidian, who had sat Emerson down at a kitchen table in Brooklyn when she was 9 years old, and taught her how to find the thing inside the thing. Every object has a secret, she'd said. The good ones hide it in plain sight. Emerson had thought she was talking about antiques. She pressed the base panel left corner, first then right, then center, and felt the faintest resistance like the wood was holding its breath. "Don't force it," Niccolo said from behind her. She hadn't heard him move, and the fact that she hadn't heard him move was its own kind of warning. She turned just enough to look at him over her shoulder. He was closer than he'd been. Not threatening, not obviously, but close enough that she understood the dynamic had shifted. This was no longer a negotiation. This was something else. "I know," she said. "My grandfather said the mechanism responds to pressure, not strength." "Your grandfather was right." She turned back to the drawer. What people who tried to force these things broke them, which is why whatever's in here is still in here after 31 years. Whoever Sterling hired either didn't know what they were doing or got impatient. "Both," Niccolo said, "mostly impatient." She pressed the center panel again, this time with less pressure and more intention, the pad of her finger rather than the tip wider, contact gentler. And she felt it, the almost imperceptible give, like a held breath released. Something inside the base of the drawer clicked. The silence after it was total. Emerson turned the drawer around in her hands and found the seam she'd missed, a hairline gap along the bottom edge, invisible under normal examination, that was now separated by the width of a credit card. She set her thumbnail against it. Pressed. The hidden panel swung open on a tiny brass hinge, smooth and silent, the mechanism so well maintained it could have been oiled yesterday. Inside was a book, not large, about the size of a hardcover novel bound in what she recognized immediately as Moroccan leather, the kind used for important documents in the mid-20th century, dark brown, worn at the corners, but intact, tied shut with a lace of braided cord, and on the cover stamped in faded gold, no title, no name. Just a symbol, a laurel branch, the same as on the desk's carved legs. Emerson looked at it for 3 full seconds without touching it. Then she looked at Niccolo. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the book with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. Something stripped of the controlled amusement, stripped of the patience, stripped of all of it. What was underneath was raw and old and tired in the way that grief was tired, like something that had been carried too long. "That's it," he said. His voice was different, quieter, almost private, like he'd forgotten she was there. "What is it?" she asked. He looked at her, seemed to remember himself. "A ledger." "Of what? Everything." He reached for it. She pulled it back, not dramatically, just enough. What does everything mean? He looked at her hand, then at her face. If he was angry, he didn't show it. It means my grandfather kept records, names, transactions, agreements. Who was loyal, who wasn't, who owed what to whom, and for how long. He paused. It means it contains the proof of things that certain people have spent 30 years trying to make sure could never be proven. People like who? People, he said carefully, like the man who arranged for this desk to be stolen in the first place. Emerson didn't move. Sterling. Sterling was a middleman. He said it like the word tasted bad. He was useful and he was paid. But the man who wanted the desk gone, who wanted what was in this desk gone, that's a different conversation. Tell me now. No. Mr. D'Amato. Niccolo. He said it flat final. And no, not yet. There are things in that ledger that you are not ready to hear, and I need to know before I say another word that you understand what it means to be in this room right now. Holding that. She looked down at the book in her hands. It felt heavier than it had any right to. I want you to understand, he said quietly, that the moment you opened that compartment, your position changed. You are no longer just an appraiser. You are someone who has seen where the ledger was hidden. And the people who want it, the people who have been looking for it for 3 decades, they will eventually find out that it's been found. That is not a threat from me. That is a fact about the world. Emerson set the ledger on the surface of the desk. She pulled off one glove, then the other, folded them precisely, and set them beside her case. You had me brought here, she said, specifically by name. You said that? Yes. You knew the ledger was in this desk. I suspected. My grandfather told my father before he died. My father told me, but no one had been able to confirm it because no one had been able to access the compartment. So you needed someone who could open it? Yes. And you chose me. She looked at him steadily. Not because of my qualifications, not because of my license or my reputation, because of my last name. He didn't look away. Both. What does my grandmother have to do with your grandfather's ledger? The pause that followed was exactly 1 beat too long. Long enough to tell her the answer mattered. Long enough to tell her she wasn't going to like it. Caterina Moretti, he said, was my grandfather's bookkeeper for 11 years. The room didn't move. Emerson's face didn't move. But something inside her shifted with a lurch that felt physical, like a floor dropping away underfoot. That's not possible, she said. It's documented. My grandmother was a seamstress. She came to Brooklyn in 1949. She worked in a garment factory on Flatbush Avenue. She married my grandfather, Aldo, in 1952, and she raised 4 children, and she stopped. Her throat had closed. She opened it again by force. She was a seamstress. She was a seamstress, Niccolo agreed. In the mornings, for the cover. In the evenings, she kept my grandfather's books, because she was the only person he trusted completely. And because she understood numbers the way my grandfather understood people, intuitively, precisely, and with total discretion. He paused. She also understood that the ledger, if it was ever found by the wrong people, would destroy everyone whose name was in it, which is why she was the one who designed the hiding mechanism. Not a Florentine craftsman. My grandfather hired the craftsman to build what she drew. Emerson stared at him. My grandmother, she said slowly, designed the mechanism that just opened for me. In 40 minutes, he said, when no one else in 31 years managed it. She looked at the drawer, at the open panel, at the hairline seam she'd found by touch by a method her grandmother had taught her at a kitchen table in Brooklyn when she was 9 years old, explaining the philosophy of hidden things. The good ones hide it in plain sight. She hadn't been teaching Emerson about antiques. She'd been teaching her how to find her grandfather's ledger. She knew, Emerson said. She always knew this might happen. She knew, Niccolo confirmed. She prepared me for it. Without telling you what you were being prepared for. He said it gently, which somehow made it worse. She was protecting you and preparing you at the same time. Emerson sat down, not in any chair in particular. She simply sat on the edge of the desk itself because her legs had made a unilateral decision. She put her hands flat on her knees and breathed. What's in it? She said. The ledger. Specifically. He hesitated. Niccolo. She used his name without thinking about it. What is specifically in that ledger? He sat down across from her, elbows on knees, and for the first time since he'd walked into the room, he looked like a man with weight on him rather than a man entirely in command of his weight. 30 years of transactions, he said. Names of people who made agreements with my grandfather. Businessmen, politicians, judges, 2 police commissioners, a state senator. The terms of those agreements. What was given, what was promised, what was delivered. Evidence of payments in specific amounts on specific dates that can be cross-referenced with financial records that still exist. He paused. And one other thing. What? The identity of the person who ordered the poisoning of a man named Salvatore Moretti. He watched her face. In 1993. The name landed in Emerson's chest like something thrown hard. Salvatore Moretti. Her father, Emerson had been 6 years old when her father died. She had been told, her mother had told her grandmother had told her, every adult in her life who had been present for it had told her that Salvatore Moretti had died of a heart attack. Sudden, unexplained. 41 years old, healthy, gone in the night. The kind of loss that cracked a family open and never quite let it heal. She had grieved him as an accident, as fate, as the kind of senseless cruelty that life sometimes delivered without reason and without warning. She looked at Niccolo. Say that again, she said, and her voice came out exactly as it had when he'd asked her to repeat the curse, flat and steady and entirely at odds with what was happening behind her eyes. The ledger contains the name of the person who ordered your father's death, he said. Salvatore Moretti was not an innocent man, Emerson. He was an underboss. He worked for my grandfather. And someone had him killed because of what he knew and what he controlled. That person is named in this ledger. And that person, he paused, is still alive. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever sat inside. Who, she said. I think you need to read it for yourself. Who? The word came out harder this time. I think Niccolo. She picked up the ledger. Her hands were perfectly steady. She had no idea how. Who ordered my father's death? He looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful in the way that people were careful with things they knew would break. The name in that ledger, he said, is Luca Moretti. Emerson didn't speak. Your uncle, he said. Your mother's brother, who has been sitting at your grandmother's at Christmas for 30 years and calling himself a good man. Emerson set the ledger back down on the desk. She stood up. She walked to the window, not because she wanted to look at anything, but because she needed to move, and the room was not large enough for what she was feeling, and moving was better than the alternative. You knew this, she said. Her back was to him. Before tonight, you knew what was in it. I knew what my father told me was in it. I needed confirmation. You needed confirmation. She turned around. You brought me here. You manipulated me into this room, into opening that desk, into finding this thing because you needed confirmation of who killed my father. I brought you here, he said carefully, because you are the only person alive who had the right to know what's in that ledger. And because the mechanism your grandmother built would only open for the right hands. That's a very convenient justification. It's the truth. So is everything else I just said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. She hated it. She breathed through it. My father was murdered by my uncle. And you knew, and you said nothing. You threatened my career. You maneuvered me into this room like a piece on a board instead of just telling me. If I had just told you, he said quietly, would you have believed me? She opened her mouth, closed it. You would have thought I was a criminal trying to manipulate you into helping him, he said, which is a fair assessment, by the way. But you would have walked out, and you would have gone back to your life, and Luca Moretti would have gone on being the man at your grandmother's Christmas table, and the truth would have stayed in that drawer for another 30 years. Emerson pressed her fingers against her sternum, pressed hard like she was trying to hold something in. My mother, she said. Yes. She knew. I believe so. That's why she left. Her voice had gone quiet, not calm quiet, the way things got quiet before they became something else entirely. She didn't leave because she wanted a different life. She left because she was running. She was running from Luca. She was protecting you, Niccolo said, the same way Katerina was protecting you. The women in your family, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite name, are exceptionally good at protecting the people they love by sacrificing what they know. Emerson looked at him. "And what are you doing?" she asked. "Right now, what is this for you?" He was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather's name is in that ledger, his legacy, everything he built. Luca Moretti has spent 30 years using what he knows, what he stole from that desk as leverage. Not to protect anyone, to control, to take, to eliminate the people who stood between him and the power he wanted." He met her eyes. "My grandfather trusted your grandmother with everything. Luca Moretti used that trust as a weapon and put it against both our families. I want that to end. And you need the ledger to end it. I need you to understand the ledger," he said, "because you're the one whose testimony will matter. You're the one whose name means something on both sides of this. You are Salvatore Moretti's daughter and Caterina Moretti's granddaughter, and you just opened a compartment that was built to be found by no one but you." Emerson picked up the ledger. She turned it over in her hands. Felt the weight of the leather, the specific gravity of it. 30 years. Her father's name inside. Her grandmother's fingerprints on its hiding place. She pulled the braided cord. It came loose easily like it had been waiting. She opened the first page. And the handwriting she found there, precise, small, slanted slightly to the left in the particular way of someone who'd been taught to write in Italian before they learned English, was her grandmother's handwriting. She had stared at that handwriting on birthday cards, in grocery lists, in recipe cards for 40 years. She pressed her fingers flat against the page and closed her eyes. "Caterina," she said so quietly it was barely a sound at all, and she began to read. She read for 6 minutes without speaking. Niccolo didn't interrupt her. He sat across the room and let her move through it page by page. And to his credit, to whatever credit a man like him had to his name, he understood that this was not the moment for words. When she stopped, it was not because she had finished. It was because she had found the date, November 14th, 1993, and the entry that followed it. And the name at the end of the entry written in her grandmother's handwriting, with a pressure that had torn slightly through the page the way you wrote when your hand was shaking. L. Moretti, authorized, paid, done. Emerson closed the ledger. She set it very carefully on the surface of the desk. She looked at Niccolo D'Amato with the expression of a woman who had just had the architecture of her entire life quietly demolished from the foundation up. "All right," she said. He waited. "What do we do next?" And that was the moment, not the curse, not the compartment, not the revelation of her father's murder. That was the moment Niccolo D'Amato understood that Emerson Moretti was not going to be a problem to manage. She was going to be something else entirely. He had no idea in that moment whether that was going to save them or destroy them both. He suspected, knowing what he knew about the Moretti women, that it was going to be neither. It was going to be something none of them had planned for. The first gunshot hit the window frame of the room 2 floors below them at 11:47 p.m., and the sound traveled up through the bones of the building like a word spoken directly into the walls. Emerson didn't flinch. Niccolo was already on his feet. And in the 3 seconds between the first shot and the second, everything that had been true about the night rearranged itself into something faster, louder, and far more dangerous than a hidden ledger in a secret drawer. The people who wanted it found Niccolo had said, "They will find out." He had not mentioned how quickly. The second gunshot was closer than the first. Niccolo moved the way water moved, without hesitation, without wasted motion, like his body had rehearsed this particular emergency in private and was now simply executing what it already knew. He crossed to the door of the study in 4 strides, put his hand flat against it without opening it, and listened. Emerson was already on her feet, the ledger in her hands. "How many entrances to this building?" she asked. He glanced at her. Something passed across his face, surprise, brief, and genuine. 4. 2 on street level, 1 through the service corridor on the east side, 1 through the garage underneath. "How many people knew you were going to be here tonight?" 3. "How many of them do you trust?" The pause was a fraction too long. 2. "Then you have a problem," she said. "That started before the shooting." He looked at her for 1 full second. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something without looking at the screen, and moved to the window. Not to look out, she noticed, but to stand to the side of it, back against the wall where anyone below couldn't draw a line between his position and theirs. She did the same on her side without being told. "Marco," he said into the phone, and his voice had flattened into something operational and was cold. "Where are you? How many? Do not tell me a number I don't want to hear. A pause. How long? Another pause longer, his jaw set. Get Caruso to the third floor. Use the passage. Don't use the stairs. He hung up. How bad? Emerson asked. Bad enough. He looked at the ledger in her hands. We need to move that. I'm not putting it down. I wasn't asking you to put it down. I was asking you to move with it. He was already crossing the room toward the far wall, toward what looked to anyone who hadn't grown up understanding how houses like this were built like a decorative panel. To Emerson, it looked like a door. Passage, she said. My grandfather had it built. He pressed the panel in a sequence she couldn't quite track, 5 points irregular. He liked passages the way he liked puzzles, as a philosophy. Your grandfather and my grandmother would have gotten along. They did, he said. The panel swung inward. That's the point. The passage was narrow and moved downward at an angle she felt in her knees, and Niccolo set a pace that assumed she could keep up. She could. She matched him stride for stride, the ledger pressed against her chest with both arms, and she kept her breathing controlled and her mind on the problem rather than the fear. Because fear was information, but panic was noise, and she did not have the bandwidth for noise right now. Who knew about tonight? She said, keeping her voice low. Pacifically. Marco, who is my head of security and who has been with my family for 19 years. He moved through the dark without slowing. Caruso, who arranged the Sterling estate appraisal contact and who I would trust with my life and have several times. And one other. Who's the one other? He didn't answer immediately. Niccolo. My cousin, he said, Aldo. He manages the legitimate side of our real estate holdings. He was the one who identified the Sterling estate sale as an opportunity to recover the desk. And you don't trust him? I trust him less than Marco and Caruso, he said, which means I trust him about 70%. 70% is a significant hole in your security. I'm aware. Is Aldo the kind of man who would tell someone where you were going to be tonight? Another pause, this one heavier. He's the kind of man, Niccolo said carefully, who would tell someone if the someone had enough leverage over him. And does someone, that he said, is what I'm currently trying to determine. They reached the bottom of the passage, and Niccolo stopped at another panel, listened for 3 seconds, then pressed through. She followed. A man was waiting on the other side. Big, square-built with a face that looked like it had been in arguments with harder things than fists and had not always won. He had a gun in his hand that he lowered when he saw Niccolo, and dark eyes that moved to Emerson with professional speed and assessment. Caruso, Niccolo said. 6 men on the perimeter. Caruso said low and fast. 2 inside already down. They came in through the garage. Someone gave them the access code. Niccolo's face didn't move, but his eyes did. And what happened in them was brief and absolute and told Emerson everything she needed to know about what Aldo D'Amato's 70% had just cost. Luca's, Niccolo said, confirmed. Caruso glanced at the ledger in Emerson's arms. His expression changed. Is that it? Yes. Then we need to get it out of here before... Oh! The third gunshot was so close that the wall beside Emerson's shoulder vibrated with it, and Caruso moved in front of both of them before the sound had finished traveling, and Niccolo's hand found Emerson's arm in the dark, not grabbing, not pulling, just present a pressure that said, stay with me. And for one very long second, the 3 of them were absolutely still. Then a voice came through the wall. Male, calm, local accent sharpened by something older underneath it. Niccolo. The voice was unhurried, conversational almost. I know you're in there. I know you found it, and I know who's with you. Emerson's blood went cold. She knew that voice. She had known that voice her entire life. She had heard it across holiday tables and on birthday phone calls, and on the morning her mother had finally told her that grief was not something you got through, but something you learned to carry. She had heard it say her name with what she had always believed was affection. Luca Moretti's voice had not changed at all in 30 years. She looked at Niccolo. He was looking at her with an expression that held something she hadn't seen from him yet, something that wasn't strategy or patience or controlled authority, something that was almost an apology. He didn't know you were going to be here, Niccolo said quietly, until he did. Aldo told him. Yes. So Luca Moretti knows his niece is standing in this passage, holding the ledger that proves he had her father killed. Yes, she looked at the wall, at the passage between his voice and her position, at the ledger against her chest. Emerson. Niccolo said her name the way she'd said her grandmother's name over the open book, quietly, like something that mattered. You don't have to. I know, she said. She raised her voice. I hear you, Uncle Luca. The silence on the other side of the wall was satisfying in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had surprised him. Good. Emerson. His voice had shifted, warmer now, performing warmth the way an actor performed grief, technically correct and emotionally empty. Baby girl, what did they tell you? Nothing I didn't read for myself, she said, a beat. What do you think you read? I think I read your name, she said, written in my grandmother's handwriting on November 14th, 1993, next to a payment and an instruction and a result. Her voice was steady. She was almost impressed by herself. I think I read how much you paid to have my father killed. Your father, he started. Don't. The word came out sharp enough to cut. Don't tell me who my father was. Don't tell me what he deserved or what he did or why it was necessary. I have been listening to you tell me what things were my whole life, and I am done listening. Another silence. Longer. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone. Give me the ledger, Emerson. No. You don't understand what you're holding. I understand exactly what I'm holding. You've spent 30 years making sure no one found it because it has your name in it. The names of the people you own, the proof of what you've done. She pressed the ledger harder against her chest. My grandmother built this hiding place. She built it knowing someday someone would need to find it. She taught me how to find it without ever saying why. She spent the last 30 years of her life making sure I could do exactly what I just did. Katerina, Luca said, and the way he said it, like a wound reopened, told her more than any of his controlled words had. Her grandmother had known, and she had kept her mouth shut for 30 years and done her work in the dark, and Luca Moretti had known she knew, and had let her live because killing Katerina Moretti would have been a step too far, even for him. She's dead now, Emerson said, and I'm here, and you don't have anything left to hold over anyone. I have you, he said. Caruso moved. Niccolo moved. Both of them shifting position, reassessing angles, because the way Luca had said it was not a threat in the abstract, it was a threat in the present tense. We need to go, Caruso said, barely audible. There are 6 men on the perimeter, Niccolo said, equally quiet. We can't go through the front. The car is in the sub-level, Caruso said, if they haven't reached it. Have they reached it? 50-50. I like those odds, Emerson said, and she started moving before either of them told her to. The sub-level garage was 40 feet of open space that felt like 40 miles, and they crossed it at a run that Emerson's 44-year-old knees registered with sharp and immediate commentary. She ignored her knees. She had the ledger. She had her case. Caruso had grabbed it from the passage. She didn't know why and didn't ask. She had the information in her head that Luca Moretti was somewhere above them and closing. The car was there. Big dark engine already running because Caruso had called ahead to someone she hadn't seen, and the someone was behind the wheel and didn't look at any of them, just put it in gear the moment the doors closed. Niccolo got in beside her. Caruso took the front. They moved. For 90 seconds, nobody said anything. The car turned twice, descended further, emerged somewhere she didn't recognize, and kept moving. Then Niccolo said, "Are you all right?" She almost laughed. "That's an interesting question." "It is," he said. "I'm asking it anyway." She looked down at the ledger in her lap. "My uncle just tried to have me killed, or acquired. I'm not entirely sure which was the goal." "Acquired," he said. "He wants the ledger. He wants you with the ledger. As leverage. Against you. Against me, against anyone who might pursue this. If he has you, he has a reason for me to stand down." "Does he know you well enough to think that would work?" He looked at her. "He doesn't know me at all. He knows of me, which is a significant difference." She turned the ledger over in her hands. "There are names in here beyond Luca's. Politicians, judges." "You said." "Yes. Those people are still in their positions. Most of them. If this ledger goes public, not to the police, because I assume the police are not an option." "Correct. Then to who? Who receives this, who has both the standing and the insulation to act on it without being shut down before they start. He was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is what I've been building toward for 4 years. She looked at him sharply. 4 years. I've known about the ledger for 4 years, since my father died and told me where to look. I spent 4 years identifying the right leverage point, the right person, the right moment, the right key, she said. He met her eyes. Yes. Me. You, he confirmed. Not because I wanted to use you, because your grandmother built a key and hid it in a person, and that person turned out to be someone He stopped. The car turned again. Someone you, what? She said. He looked at the window. Someone I didn't expect. She let that sit. There were bigger problems than what Niccolo D'Amato had or hadn't expected from her. And she was not a woman who chased a half-finished sentence into dangerous territory when the whole world was already dangerous enough. My mother, she said instead, she needs to be protected. Already done. He pulled out his phone, showed her a text exchange she couldn't read in the moving dark, but could see was several messages long. Marco has a team at her building in Queens. She won't know they're there. Emerson stared at him. You did that before tonight. I did that this afternoon. Because you knew Luca would find out eventually. Because I knew that the moment we found the ledger, Luca would move on every person connected to it. Your mother is connected. She's been connected since 1993. He put the phone away. She is also, if you didn't already know this, the reason Luca never came after you directly. Rosa Moretti told her brother that if anything ever happened to you, she would go to every journalist in New York and with everything she knew. Emerson absorbed this. My mother threatened a mafia boss. Your mother terrified a mafia boss, he said, for 30 years, which is why you've been safe and why she's been paying for it in ways that have nothing to do with money. She thought about her mother, Rosa Moretti, 67 years old, who lived alone in a Queens apartment and went to Mass every Sunday and called Emerson every Thursday evening, and never in 44 years had once mentioned her brother's name without a careful blankness behind her eyes. Paying for it, in ways that have nothing to do with money. She's been alone, Emerson said. All this time, she's been protecting you, Niccolo said, the same way they all were. Caterina from the hiding place, Rosa from the front, and your father before Luca took him, your father was trying to get out. The ledger proves it. His name is in there as a dissenting voice. He told my grandfather that Luca was dangerous, that he wanted out of the arrangement, that he was going to take his family, and he stopped himself. And Luca found out, Emerson finished, and had him killed before he could. Yes. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for 3 seconds. Just 3. Then she took her hands down and looked at the ledger and thought about her father's name inside it, and her grandmother's handwriting, and her mother alone in Queens for 30 years. And she made a decision that felt less like a choice than like a thing that had already been decided before she was born. I'm not a key, she said quietly. Niccolo waited. I'm not something you use to open a door and then set down. She looked at him directly. Whatever you've been building for 4 years, the strategy, the leverage point, the plan for what happens when the ledger is found, I'm in it, not as an instrument, as a partner. He held her gaze for a long moment. You have no idea what that means, he said, what that world is. I'm holding its history in my lap, she said. I think I'm getting a fairly detailed introduction. It's not safe. I'm in a car fleeing from my uncle who just shot at the building I was in. I think we're past discussing what's safe. Something moved across his face that she was starting to recognize the moment when the performance dropped, and what was underneath it was simply a man looking at a woman recalculating everything's. Your grandmother was right about you, he said. She went very still. What do you mean? He reached into his jacket and produced a single folded piece of paper. Not old, the fold was recent, the crease sharp. He held it out. She took it. She unfolded it. It was a letter, handwritten. The same slanted, left-leaning script she'd spent her life reading on birthday cards and recipe cards and grocery lists. Her grandmother's handwriting. At the top, a date. 3 weeks before Caterina Moretti had died. For the one who finds the desk. And if it is you, my heart, then you already know everything you need to know. You just don't know that you know it yet. Trust the D'Amato boy. His grandfather was a hard man, but an honest one, and the apple does not fall as far as people want to believe. The ledger is the proof. You are the voice. Together you are the thing Luca has been afraid of since 1993. He was afraid then, and he is afraid now. Fear makes men make mistakes. Let him be afraid. I love you more than Sicily, and that is saying something. Nona Emerson read it twice. Then she folded it along its crease and held it in her hand and looked straight ahead and did not cry because Caterina Moretti had not raised a woman who cried in moving cars with work still left to do. She sent it to you, Emerson said, 3 weeks before she died. Niccolo confirmed. She found me through channels I still don't fully understand, which tells me she was significantly more connected than anyone gave her credit for. She always was, Emerson said softly. The car slowed. Caruso said something quiet to the driver who responded in a dialect she half recognized. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere Luca doesn't know about, Niccolo said. One of 3 properties I hold under a name that doesn't exist. And then he said, we decode the rest of the ledger, all of it. Names, dates, amounts, everything. We build a case that can't be buried. And we figure out who among the living is afraid enough of what's in it to act. And Luca, the car stopped. Niccolo looked at her in the moment before the door opened, and his expression was something she had no name for yet. Not because it was unreadable, but because it was the kind of thing you needed time with before you could say what it was. Luca Moretti has been the most dangerous man in your family's life for 30 years, he said. But he has never once in those 30 years faced the 2 things that are about to come for him at the same time, which are the truth, he said, and a Moretti woman who isn't afraid of him anymore. Emerson looked at her grandmother's letter in her hand, looked at the ledger in her lap, felt the weight of both. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the dark, and Niccolo D'Amato was half a step behind her, and somewhere across this city, Luca Moretti was regrouping and recalculating and making the kind of mistakes that afraid men made. She was going to make sure he made every single one of them. The safe house smelled like coffee and old wood, and the particular kind of silence that belonged to places that had never been meant for comfort, only survival. Emerson had been awake for 19 hours. She knew this because she checked her watch when she arrived at the Sterling mansion at 4 in the afternoon, and it was now 11 minutes past 11, and she had not sat down in a way that counted as sitting since the passage beneath the 3rd-floor study. Her body was registering its opinion of this loudly and continuously. She ignored it. The ledger was open on the table in front of her. She had been working through it systematically for 40 minutes, the way she worked through a complex appraisal, not rushing toward the conclusion, but reading the object in the order it wanted to be read. Her grandmother had organized it chronologically, and there was a logic to the chronology that was almost architectural. The early entries were spare factual names and figures and dates with no commentary. The later ones grew denser, more urgent. The handwriting changed in the final third, still precise, still controlled, but with a pressure behind it that the earlier pages didn't have. The pressure of someone who understood with increasing clarity what they were sitting on. Caruso had set up a scanner and was photographing each page as Emerson finished with it. He'd explained without being asked that they needed digital copies in 3 separate locations before morning, because a physical document, however historic, however damning, was only as powerful as its ability to survive what was coming. Niccolo was on the phone in the next room. She could hear him, not the words, just the tone which shifted between controlled and intense and controlled again, the way people shifted when they were managing multiple crises and choosing moment to moment which one got the full weight of their attention. She turned a page and stopped. Caruso, she said. He looked up from the scanner. This entry, November 1989, she pointed without touching. The name here, Benedetto Ricci, is that? The state attorney, Caruso said without hesitation. Current state attorney. He's been in office 11 years. He was paid, she said. Specific amounts. 4 separate dates. For she doesn't say what for, she just writes, arrangement favorable outcome. Borough of Manhattan, Superior Court case reference. She squinted at the reference number. Can we cross-reference that? Give me 20 minutes. Take 15. She turned the page, kept reading. Niccolo appeared in the doorway. He looked at her, then at the page she was on. How far? 60%. She didn't look up. I've counted 14 individual names so far, 3 judges, 1 state senator, Vincent Catalano, who is currently ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, which is convenient for everyone except the people trying to prosecute using the judiciary. One deputy commissioner of the NYPD, retired but still connected. Ricci, who is not retired and very connected. She looked up. Your grandfather was extraordinarily thorough. He was a man who understood that trust required evidence. Niccolo said. He trusted people, but he kept records of the trust in case the people ever stopped deserving it. How many of them are still alive? Most of them. How many of them know the ledger exists? All of them knew it existed. None of them knew where, or whether it was still intact. He came into the room, fully sat across from her. When Sterling took the desk, Luca told them the ledger had been destroyed, that he'd recovered it and burned it. But he hadn't. He hadn't because he couldn't open the compartment, and he couldn't tell anyone he couldn't open it because that would reveal that the only record of his own treachery was sitting intact somewhere in Thomas Sterling's house. He paused. It's the reason Sterling had to die quietly. He couldn't be prosecuted for theft. Luca couldn't surface the theft without surfacing his reasons for wanting the desk. So Sterling lived, and the desk sat in his study. For 31 years, Emerson said. For 31 years. She looked at him across the table. Luca told all those people, the judges, the politicians, the commissioner, that their names were gone, that they were safe. Yes. So when he finds out the ledger is intact and we have it, every single one of them, Niccolo said quietly, becomes a problem for him, because they will panic. And panicked men with power and connections are significantly more dangerous than organized criminals, because they have access to instruments of the state, and they have everything to lose, and they are not accustomed to the particular fear of being genuinely cornered. Emerson absorbed this. He's going to move fast. He's already moving. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it. Unknown number, but the area code was Queens. She looked at Niccolo. Marco's with her, he said immediately. That's one of our numbers. She answered. Ms. Moretti, a man's voice professional and calm. Your mother is safe. She's asked me to tell you three things. First, she is fine and not afraid. Second, a brief pause as if he was reading. She says she's been waiting for this night for 30 years and to please not treat her like she's made of glass. Third, another pause slightly longer. She says to tell you that there is a second letter in the lining of the blue coat in her hall closet. She says you'll know which coat. Emerson's breath stopped. A second letter. Tell her I'll call her when it's safe, Emerson said. Tell her I love her. Yes, ma'am. She hung up. Niccolo was watching her. A second letter. From my grandmother. She was already standing. Caruso, can we get someone to Queens safely quickly without Luca's people tracking the movement? Already have 2 cars in Queens, Caruso said. My mother's hall closet. A blue coat. There's something in the lining. Caruso was on his phone before she finished the sentence. Niccolo stood. Emerson? She looked at him. Your grandmother sent me 1 letter, he said. If she sent a second to your mother, it means there's information she didn't give me. Information she held back deliberately. Why would she hold back from you? Because she trusted me with what I needed to act, he said slowly, like he was working it out as he spoke. And she gave your mother what she needed you to have, separately, in case one path failed. She built redundancy into it, Emerson said, like a mechanism. Like a mechanism, he confirmed. She sat back down with the ledger. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. She thought about her grandmother, really thought about her not as a memory or a grief, but as a person, a woman who had kept 11 years of records for a dangerous man and hidden them in a puzzle and spent 30 years quietly, patiently, arranging the pieces so that the right people would find them in the right order. Caterina Moretti had been playing a very long game, and she had trusted Emerson to be the end game. The weight of that landed fully for the first time, and Emerson let it land, let herself feel the full measure of it, and then she turned the page and kept reading. It was Caruso who found the discrepancy. He'd been cross-referencing the court case reference from the 1989 entry against public records quietly, methodically, the way a man worked when he was good at his job and didn't need to announce his progress. And he looked up from his laptop at 12:47 in the morning and said, Niccolo, come look at this. Niccolo crossed to him. Emerson looked up. The case reference, Caruso said, Borough of Manhattan Superior Court, 1989. I found it. He turned the laptop around. It's a civil case, not criminal. Property dispute resolved in favor of the plaintiff, a real estate holding company called Stretto, LLC. He paused. Stretto, LLC was incorporated in 1987. Sole director listed in the original filing. Niccolo's face had gone completely still. Is Luca Moretti? Caruso finished. The silence was brief and absolute. He didn't just have judges in his pocket, Emerson said. He was using them to build his own empire, separate from your grandfather's. While working for my grandfather, Niccolo said, his voice was controlled, but only barely. Taking payments that should have gone to the family accounts and routing them through a shell company that existed to make Luca Moretti independently wealthy and independently powerful. Your grandfather knew, Emerson said. Both men looked at her. He knew, she said. It's in the ledger, look. She turned back 3 pages, found the entry. October 1989, 1 month before the Ricci payment. He writes, she writes on your grandfather's instruction, LM matter. Pending resolution, ED monitoring. ED is Enzo D'Amato. He was watching. He knew Luca was skimming. He was building a case against his own man. And then the desk was stolen in 93, Niccolo said. And your grandfather died in 94, Caruso said quietly. The 3 of them looked at each other across the table. Luca didn't just steal the desk to hide his treachery, Niccolo said. It wasn't a question. He was reconstructing something piece by piece, and the picture coming together was uglier than any version he'd held before. He took the desk because my grandfather was about to move against him. The ledger wasn't just a record of Luca's crimes. It was the foundation of a case your grandfather was building to remove him. And with the desk gone, Emerson said, the case collapsed, and your grandfather died of a heart attack, Niccolo said flatly, 8 months later, which we accepted because he was 73 and not a well man. He was quiet for 3 seconds, which I am now re-examining. Emerson closed the ledger. She looked at him directly. Niccolo, do you think Luca killed your grandfather too? The question sat in the air between them like a lit match. I think, he said, that a man who would pay to have his own brother-in-law murdered would not hesitate to arrange the death of an old man who had documentation of his crimes. He said it with perfect control, and the control itself was the most frightening thing she'd heard from him yet, because it meant the fury underneath it was something he was actively containing and had been containing for a long time. I think my family has been grieving an accident for 30 years when we should have been grieving a murder. The ledger might have proof, Emerson said. Then find it, he said. Read every page, everything. She opened the ledger again. So, the second letter arrived at 2:18 in the morning, brought by a man she didn't know, who handed it to Caruso without a word and left. Caruso brought it to Emerson. She recognized the coat's silk lining still folded around it. Her mother had sewn it in, not sealed it in any envelope, stitched it into the fabric itself, where it would never be found in a casual search. Her grandmother had been hiding things in plain sight her entire life. She unfolded it carefully. It was longer than the first. 3 pages both sides, the handwriting smaller and more compressed, as if Katerina had been rationing paper or rationing time or both. She read it once quickly, then again slowly, and by the 3rd page she had stopped breathing entirely and had to consciously restart. She set it down. What does it say? Niccolo asked. She looked at him across the table. She thought about the way he'd said trust the D'Amato boy when he'd read the first letter aloud for her, the slight roughness in his voice that he'd quickly smooth over. My grandmother didn't just keep the ledger for your grandfather, she said. She kept a second set of records, separately, privately, a record of everything she witnessed that your grandfather did not ask her to document. Niccolo's expression shifted. What kind of things? The kind of things, she said carefully, that a powerful man doesn't put in his own books because they're the things he did that even he understood were wrong. She looked at him steadily. Your grandfather was not a saint, Niccolo. The ledger is his record of agreements and loyalties. My grandmother's private record is a different document. It includes things he ordered that he didn't want written down officially. He held her gaze. Say it. There are 3 names, she said. People who were killed on Enzo D'Amato's instruction. Not Luca's, not anyone else's, your grandfather's. The room was so quiet she could hear Caruso not moving on the other side of it. Who? Niccolo said. A man named Pietro Calvino, 1961. A man named Ruggero Sante, 1967. And a woman, she paused. A woman named Giulia Ferrante, 1971. Something happened in Nicolo's face that she hadn't seen before and couldn't fully name. Not denial, not anger. Something closer to grief that had been waiting for a confirmation it had hoped would never come. You know that name, she said. Giulia Ferrante was my grandfather's second cousin, he said. We were told she died in a car accident in Italy, 1971. She didn't. He looked at the letter in her hands. Why would your grandmother document this? Why would she risk? Because she was an honest woman, Emerson said simply. She was loyal to your grandfather, and she protected his ledger for 30 years, and she built the mechanism that hid it. But she was also a woman with a conscience, and she kept her own record because she believed that the truth, all of it, not just the parts that suited the people still living, deserved a survivor. She paused. She writes at the end of this letter that she is giving it to my mother and not to me directly because she wasn't sure I was ready, that she hoped by the time I found the desk I would be. She looked at him, and she writes that she is giving it to you through me and not directly to you because she believed that a good man needed to know the full truth about the people he loved even when the truth was hard, especially then. Nicolo sat back. For the first time in the hours she'd spent with him, he looked his age, which was somewhere in the early 50s, and carried in this moment the weight of considerably more. She's right, he said at last, that it's hard. I know. It doesn't change what we're doing. I know that too. She folded the letter along its original creases. Your grandfather did terrible things. Luca Moretti has done worse and for worse reasons without the complicated justifications of building something or protecting something just for power and money and the pleasure of controlling people who trusted him. The ledger proves what Luca did. Your grandfather's history is separate from that. But it's part of the whole truth. Yes, she said, it is. And when this is over, when Luca is dismantled and the people in this ledger are facing what they've done, I think the full picture needs to be part of the record. She paused. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I know you're not, he said quietly. I'm saying it because my grandmother trusted us, both of us, with all of it, not just the useful parts. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up, and the thing behind his eyes had shifted again, harder. Clearer, this kind of clarity that came from a man who had faced something he'd been avoiding and found that the facing of it, however painful, was cleaner than the avoidance. What else does she write? He said. The last page, Emerson said, is a list, 12 names, people she describes as, and I'm reading directly, those who know the truth and have been waiting for someone to say it out loud. People inside the system, inside the legitimate structures of this city, a federal prosecutor, 2 journalists, a judge she describes as incorruptible, which is rare enough to be worth documenting, a city councilwoman. Allies, Nicolo said. People who have been waiting for documentation, Emerson said. People who suspected but couldn't move without evidence. My grandmother spent 30 years watching and listening and identifying every person in this city who was positioned to act when the proof finally surfaced. She looked at him. She didn't just hide the ledger. She built us an army. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. Lighter somehow, charged. Caruso made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. Nicolo looked at the letter, then at Emerson, then at the ledger between them, and something crossed his face that she had no name for yet, but thought she would give in time. Caterina Moretti, he said softly, was the most dangerous person in any room she ever walked into. I'm starting to understand that, Emerson said. Her phone lit up on the table. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. But the text that followed was 5 words, and they arrived like a rock through glass, and the lightness in the room collapsed instantly. I have your mother, call me. Emerson looked at the screen for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and she called the number, and when Luca Moretti answered, she said without greeting, without hesitation, in the flattest and most dangerous voice she had ever used in her life, you just made the last mistake you're going to make. Luca Moretti was quiet for 3 seconds after she spoke. Then he laughed. It was the laugh she remembered from childhood, warm, full, the laugh of a man who knew how to perform ease better than most people felt it naturally. The laugh that had sat across from her at 30 years of holiday dinners and made her feel every single time that whatever room Luca was in was slightly more alive than the rooms he wasn't in. She had loved that laugh her entire life. She hated it now with a precision that surprised her. "Baby girl," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't do the voice. Don't do the warmth. We're past it." She was standing. She hadn't decided to stand. Her body had simply refused to have this conversation sitting down. "Where is my mother?" "Safe," he said. "Completely safe. I want you to know that. I am not a man who hurts women." "You are a man who had my father killed," she said. "So I'm going to need you to retire the self-image." A pause, the warmth in his voice dropped 1 degree. Salvatore made choices. Salvatore wanted out, she said. He wanted to take his family away from you, and you couldn't let that happen, so you had him poisoned and told his 6-year-old daughter it was a heart attack and sat at her grandmother's table for the next 30 years eating her food and letting her call you uncle. Her voice didn't crack. She would not let it crack. "That is who you are, so don't tell me what kind of man you are." Silence. Then, "What do you want, Emerson?" "I want my mother." "And in exchange?" "Nothing." Another pause. "That's not how this works." "I know how this works," she said. "You want the ledger. You want me to bring you the ledger, and in exchange, you release my mother, and then you destroy the ledger, and you destroy me, and you go back to your life. That's the exchange you're building toward." She let one beat pass. "I'm telling you it's not available." "Then we have a problem." "No," she said. "You have a problem, and I'm going to tell you exactly what it is." She looked at Niccolo across the table. He was watching her with an expression that was still and focused and entirely present, the way a man watched something he understood was important and did not want to interrupt. "The ledger has been photographed. Every page. Copies exist in 3 locations you don't know about and can't reach. The names in that ledger, every judge, every politician, every person you have spent 30 years telling was safe because the proof was gone, have been informed in the last 2 hours that the proof is not gone, that it has in fact been found, and that it is going to a federal prosecutor whose name my grandmother wrote down in 1994 as someone worth trusting." The silence on the other end was the best silence she had ever heard. "You're lying," he said, but the warmth was entirely gone now, and what was underneath it was something older and colder and much more honest. "I'm a woman whose grandmother spent 30 years building exactly this moment," Emerson said. "I don't need to lie. She did the work already. I just had to show up and open a drawer." "Those people," he started, "are panicking," she said, "right now as we speak, because they spent 30 years believing they were safe, and they are finding out tonight that they were never safe. They were just uninformed." She paused. "They're going to come for you, Luca. Not us. You. Because you told them the ledger was gone and it wasn't, and every consequence they're about to face traces back to that lie. You made them vulnerable, and you let them believe otherwise. People don't forgive that, especially people with power and nothing left to lose." She could hear him breathing. "Release my mother," she said, "because keeping her does nothing for you now. The ledger is already out of your reach. Hurting Rosa Moretti only adds to what's already being built against you, and what's already being built against you is sufficient to end everything you have." She paused one final time. "And because she's your sister. And whatever you are, I have to believe some part of you remembers what that means." She hadn't planned that last part. It came out of somewhere she hadn't consciously accessed. Some remnant of the child who had loved the man across the holiday table before she knew what he was. The silence stretched, then Luca Moretti said very quietly, "She'll be at the corner of her street in 20 minutes. And he hung up. Emerson lowered the phone. Her hand was shaking. Now finally it was shaking. Niccolo crossed the room in 4 strides and put both hands on her shoulders and looked at her directly. Not with the controlled assessment he'd used in the study, with something real and immediate and human. "You just did," he said quietly, "what 4 years of my planning couldn't." "I had help," she said. "I had 30 years of my grandmother's help." "Yes," he said, "but you're the one who made him believe it." "I didn't make him believe anything," she said. "I told him the truth. The truth was just bigger than he expected." Rosa Moretti was standing on the corner of her street in Queens at 3:41 in the morning when Marco's car pulled up, and she was precisely as she had told the man on the phone, not afraid. She was wearing her good coat, the green one she kept for church and appointments, and she had her purse on her arm. And when Emerson got out of the car and crossed the sidewalk to her, Rosa looked at her daughter's face for 3 seconds and then pulled her in with both arms and held on. They stood there on a Queens sidewalk in the dead of night for a long time. Long enough for Emerson to feel every hour of the night in her body at once, every discovery, every word, every shake of her hands that she hadn't let herself feel until now. "He let you go," Emerson said into her mother's shoulder. "He always was afraid of women," Rosa said. Her voice was dry and steady and 67 years old, and the most comforting sound Emerson had ever heard. Emerson pulled back and looked at her. Really looked. "You knew." "I knew what your grandmother told me to know," Rosa said. "And I knew what I saw with my own eyes. And I kept my mouth shut, and I made a threat that kept you safe, and I lived with the rest of it." She cupped Emerson's face in both hands the way she'd done since Emerson was small. "Is it done? It's starting," Emerson said. "The being done part is starting." Rosa nodded. "Then let's get somewhere warm, and you can tell me everything." Nicola was on the phone with the federal prosecutor before dawn. The prosecutor's name was Helen Marsh, and she was 61 years old and had been building cases against organized crime for 34 years. And when Caruso reached her at 4 in the morning, she did not sound like a woman who had been sleeping. She sounded like a woman who had been waiting. "Caterina Moretti's granddaughter," she said when Emerson got on the line. "You knew my grandmother," Emerson said. "I met her once," Marsh said, "in 2003. She came to my office alone and told me there was documentation of significant criminal activity, corruption at multiple levels of city and state government, and that it would surface when the time was right, and that I should be prepared to move quickly when it did." A pause. "I thought she was a very sharp old woman with a story she couldn't back up. I kept her file open anyway. Out of respect." "She told you it would surface," Emerson said. "She was very certain. She said, and I'm quoting from my own notes here, 'My granddaughter will bring it to you. She doesn't know this yet, but she will.'" The prosecutor's voice had something in it that was almost wonder. 23 years ago, Miss Moretti. She told me 23 years ago." Emerson closed her eyes for 1 second. "Caterina, you impossible, magnificent woman." "I have the ledger," Emerson said. "The original and 37 digital copies in verified locations. I have a second document, private records kept independently by the same source. And I have a witness." "Who?" "Me," Emerson said. "I'm the one who found it. I'm the one who can authenticate the hiding mechanism, the construction, the handwriting, and the chain of custody from the moment I opened the compartment. I'm also the granddaughter of the woman who built the hiding place and kept both sets of records. My testimony puts this in context that no one else can provide." She paused. "And I want to give it, on the record, all of it." Marsh was quiet for a moment. "This is going to be the most complex case I've ever built." "My grandmother gave you 23 years to prepare," Emerson said. "I think you're ready." For the first time, Marsh laughed. Brief, genuine, startled out of her. "Get to my office at 8 a.m., she said. "Bring the ledger, bring the second document, bring your witness list, and bring yourself." "I'll be there at 7:50, Emerson said. She hung up. The room was quiet. Rosa was at the table with a cup of coffee that Caruso had produced from somewhere. Nicola was standing near the window, and he turned when she looked at him, and his expression was the one she had no name for, the one she'd been accumulating slowly through the night. "Marsh," he said. 8 a.m. He nodded. "I'll be there." "You understand," she said carefully, "that being there means being part of the record. Your name, your family's name, everything." "I know. Your grandfather's name, too. Both sides of it." He looked at her steadily. "I know. You were right earlier. The full truth has to be part of it. Whatever my grandfather did, it goes in the record with everything else." He paused. "My grandmother used to say that a man who only wants half the truth is a man who's still lying to himself." She sounds like she and Caterina would have gotten along. They did, apparently. Something almost like a smile crossed his face. "I've been putting that together slowly all night." Emerson looked at her mother, who was listening to this exchange with the expression of a woman who had known considerably more than she'd let on for considerably longer than anyone had realized. "Mama," Emerson said, "how much did Nana tell you?" Rosa looked up, set down her coffee with great deliberateness. Everything, she said simply. She told me everything. She told me the night before she died. All of it. The ledger, the hiding place, the second document, the prosecutor's name, your name on the list. She met her daughter's eyes. She told me she was sorry she couldn't tell you herself, that she was afraid if she told you too soon, Luca would find out you knew, and you'd be in danger before the moment was right. So she waited until she was dying. She waited until she was certain, Rosa corrected gently. There's a difference. Your grandmother was never careless. She was never reckless. She calculated every step, every year, every piece of information she gave to whom and when. She kept me in the dark on the details for 30 years because she knew that what I didn't know, Luca couldn't take from me. Rosa's voice was steady, but her eyes were not. She was protecting all of us, all the way to the end. Even her death was she arranged it. She made sure everything was in place before she let go. Emerson stared at her mother. She chose when she died. Rosa's chin lifted slightly. She had a heart condition. She knew the timeline. She used it. A beat. She was a very determined woman. Caruso made the sound again, the one that was almost a laugh. This time it came all the way through. Niccolo put his hand flat on the table and looked at it for a moment. When he looked up, he said, Enzo D'Amato and Caterina Moretti deserve a very specific kind of legacy. Whatever else they were, whatever they did that was wrong, they spent the last years of their lives trying to make something right. We should honor that. We will, Emerson said, by finishing it. Benedetto Ricci, state attorney, resigned at 9:17. A.M. Vincent Catalano, state senator, announced a leave of absence at 10:45 for reasons he described as personal health. The deputy commissioner retired, hired a criminal defense attorney at 11 and refused all calls. Luca Moretti was taken into federal custody at 1:18 p.m. at his home in Westchester by a team that moved so quickly and cleanly that his neighbors didn't know anything had happened until the evening news. Emerson was in Helen Marsh's office when the confirmation came through. She was sitting in a chair with the ledger on the table, and Rosa beside her and Niccolo across the room near the window where he'd been standing since 9 a.m. And when Marsh's deputy knocked and said the three words they'd been waiting for, Luca's in custody, the room went completely quiet. Then Rosa Moretti said in the tone of a woman who had been waiting 30 years for a sentence to end, "Good." And that was all. Emerson looked at the ledger on the table. She thought about her grandmother's handwriting on the first page, the pressure of it, the small, slanted, left-leaning script of a woman who had written in Italian before she learned English and had never fully let the old language go. She thought about a 9-year-old girl at a kitchen table in Brooklyn being taught how to find the thing in Sicilian thing, being taught without knowing she was being taught how to open a drawer that wouldn't be there for another 30 years. She thought about her father's name, November 14th, 1993. The entry that had torn slightly through the page. She reached across the table and closed the ledger. Not because they were done with it. Marsh's team would spend months with it, would pull every name and date and figure through the machinery of federal prosecution, would build a case that Caterina Moretti had begun building in 1962 and had finished building in the lining of a blue coat in a Queens hallway. They were not done with it, but Emerson was done with carrying it alone. She could set it down now. It was in the right hands. She looked at Niccolo. He was already looking at her. "What happens now?" she said. "For you." He was quiet for a moment. "The family reorganizes. The legitimate holdings are considerable real estate import to manufacturing concerns. There's meaningful work to do in making all of it unambiguously legitimate. It will take time." He paused. "And there's a desk." She blinked. "What?" "A 17th Are you showing me? Century Florentine desk," he said, "currently sitting in the study. It's the study of a Manhattan townhouse that belongs to my family and was stolen 31 years ago. I intend to recover it through the proper legal channels, which will be considerably easier now." He looked at her steadily. "It needs a proper appraisal, for the record." She understood what he was asking. She also understood it was not really about the desk. "I charge standard rates," she said. "I'll pay above standard," he said, "for the expertise. And for the Sicilian. Especially for that." Rosa looked between them with the expression of a mother who was choosing with great deliberateness to examine the middle distance. Helen Marsh returned to the room with a legal pad and an expression of controlled professional excitement that told Emerson the next several months of her life were going to be unlike any months that had come before them. She was ready. She realized, sitting in a federal prosecutor's office at 1:30 in the afternoon with her mother beside her and her grandmother's ledger closed on the table, and a mafia boss across the room who had called her by her first name for the last 6 hours, like it was something he'd been doing for years, exactly where Caterina Moretti had always intended her to be. The thought should have been frightening. Instead, it felt strangely and completely like coming home. 3 weeks later, the desk was delivered to Niccolo D'Amato's address by court order. Emerson was there when it arrived. She ran her hands over the inlay, the carved laurel branches, the family crest, the worn surface that had been lived with for centuries and hidden in a dead man's house, and had come home finally to the people it had always been waiting for. She found, when she examined the back panel for the formal appraisal, a second pin mechanism, smaller than the first, in a location that would only make sense to someone who had already found the first one. She pressed it. A tiny drawer no larger than an index card slid open from the interior frame. Inside was a photograph, black and white edges, soft with age. 2 women at a kitchen table laughing at something outside the frame. Young 20s, maybe. One of them she recognized immediately as a young version of the face from every photograph her mother owned. Caterina Moretti, the other woman she didn't recognize. But around the other woman's neck was a locket, and on the locket was a laurel branch, and written on the back of the photograph in her grandmother's handwriting were 4 words. "We always knew Cara." Emerson held the photograph for a long time. Then she set it carefully on the surface of the desk in the worn place where a century of hands had rested, and she looked at it, and she thought about 2 women at a kitchen table, laughing at something no one else could see, building something in the dark that would take 60 years to finish. Niccolo came to stand beside her and looked at the photograph without speaking. After a moment he said, "That's my grandmother." Emerson looked at him. "Elena D'Amato," he said quietly. "Circa 1955, I'd guess from her face." He looked at the photograph for another long moment. "They knew each other before my grandfather hired Caterina. They were friends first." "They built all of this," Emerson said, "together, from the beginning." "From the very beginning," he said. She looked at the photograph, at the 2 women laughing, at the table between them and the world outside the frame that neither of them was looking at because they were looking at each other, and whatever they saw was worth laughing about. "We always knew Cara," she said, reading the words aloud. Niccolo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So did we. I think we just needed someone to open the right drawer." Emerson Moretti looked at the desk that had started everything and ended everything and turned out to be like all the best antiques, not just an object, but a story told in wood and brass and hidden mechanisms, and the particular genius of people who understood that the most important things in a life deserved to be protected until the right hands came to find them. She had been those hands. She had always been those hands. And the Moretti women, as Luca had learned too late, and the rest of the world was just beginning to understand, did not lose. They waited. They built. They passed the knowledge from hand to hand, in kitchens and coat linings and hidden drawers, and whispered Sicilian curses that were really love letters to the people who would come after them. And then, when the time was finally right, they won.